Welcome to British Accent Podcast.
Welcome back to the British Accent Podcast.
I'm James, and as always, we're here to help you improve your English in a fun and effective way.
Today, we're tackling a question that a lot of people ask. Can you actually learn English while you sleep?
Hey everyone, I'm Emma, and yes, this idea sounds amazing, right? Just put on an English podcast, go to sleep, and wake up speaking fluently. But does it really work? Or is it just wishful thinking?
That's exactly what we're going to find out today.
We'll look at what science says about learning in your sleep, whether passive listening can really help, and the best ways to reinforce your English skills even while you're resting.
So, if you've ever dreamed of learning English effortlessly, stick around. You might be surprised by what we discover.
All right, so let's start with what people mean when they talk about learning in your sleep. The idea is that if you listen to English while you're asleep, your brain will somehow absorb the language without effort. But does this actually happen?
Good question. Well, studies have shown that while your brain does process sounds during sleep, it's not the same as active learning. You're not magically going to wake up speaking perfect English just because you played an audiobook overnight.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean there's no benefit at all.
Research suggests that hearing words or phrases repeatedly, whether awake or asleep, can help reinforce memory. It's called sleep-assisted learning, but it works best when combined with active study while you're awake.
Right, so listening to English while you sleep won't replace actual practice, but it might help with familiarity. If you already know certain words or phrases, your brain could strengthen those connections while you sleep.
So, if you're thinking of using sleep learning, the key is to combine it with real, intentional learning.
That means practicing speaking, listening, and engaging with the language during the day.
And there are smarter ways to do this. Instead of just playing random English podcasts at night, you could review words you studied earlier in the day. That way, your brain is already primed to recognize them while you sleep.
That's a great point, Emma.
And another trick is to listen to something with clear pronunciation, like audiobooks or podcasts made for English learners.
If the speech is too fast or unclear, it won't be as effective.
Yes, and I'd also recommend sticking to familiar content. If you play something completely new, your brain might not process it as well. But if it's a topic or a story you already understand, you're reinforcing what you've learned.
That makes sense.
I think the key takeaway is that passive listening can be useful, but only as a supplement.
It won't replace speaking practice, writing, or actually engaging with the language.
Absolutely, think of it like background reinforcement. If you combine it with active learning during the day, reading, speaking, and writing, it could help reinforce words and phrases over time.
And honestly, if listening to English while sleeping makes you feel more connected to the language, why not try it?
Just don't expect to wake up fluent overnight.
Exactly. So, listeners, have you ever tried learning English while sleeping? Did it help you? Let us know your experience.
And if you're thinking about trying this, maybe start with something simple like a story you've already read or a podcast episode you've listened to before. That way, your brain is reinforcing familiar words instead of struggling with completely new information.
That's a great idea. Also, if you want to test if it's working, try listening to something before you sleep, and then in the morning, see if you remember any of it. You might be surprised.
Yeah,
And keep in mind, the best way to improve is still through active practice.
but hey, if listening while you sleep helps even a little, then why not use every advantage you can?
Exactly. It's all about using a mix of techniques and finding what works best for you.
And speaking of mixing techniques, another interesting approach is combining passive listening with active recall. For example, after listening to something while sleeping, you could try summarizing what you remember the next morning.
Oh, I love that. It turns passive input into active learning. Even if you don't remember exact words, just the act of trying to recall something helps reinforce it in your brain.
Right, and if you really want to step it up, you could even write down a few keywords before bed and see if they come to mind in the morning.
That's a cool experiment. I think the key takeaway here is that passive learning, like listening while sleeping, can be helpful, but it works best when combined with active practice.
Yeah, so don't just rely on sleep learning.
Keep practicing, speaking, and listening actively. Your brain will thank you.
Absolutely. And another thing to consider is repetition. If you listen to the same audio while sleeping multiple times, your brain gets more chances to absorb the patterns of the language.
Good point.
That's why language learners often benefit from repeating phrases and sentences.
Even if you don't consciously remember everything, your brain gets more familiar with the sounds and rhythms of English.
Exactly, and pairing this with active listening during the day makes a big difference. For example, you could listen to the same audio while awake and really focus on the words, then let it play passively at night.
I like that strategy.
It reinforces what you've already learned and makes it easier for your brain to process.
Plus, it doesn't take extra time out of your day.
Yeah, it's a simple way to add more exposure to English without feeling overwhelmed. The key is balance. Use passive learning as a support, not as your main method.
Right, and that brings us to another point. Variety. If you listen to different accents, topics, and speaking speeds, your brain gets used to different patterns, making it easier to understand real-world conversations.
Exactly. A lot of people struggle with understanding native speakers because they're only used to one type of accent or a slow, clear voice from textbooks. But if you expose yourself to different styles of speaking, even passively, it helps you adapt faster.
That's so true. And another thing that might help is using background noise. When you listen to English with some background noise, like in a CF or while commuting, it can train your ear to pick up words even in less than perfect conditions.
Good point. That's actually a useful trick because real-life conversations aren't always crystal clear. If you can understand English with background noise, you'll find real conversations a lot easier.
Right. And speaking of making things easier, let's talk about using subtitles. Some people think they should avoid subtitles entirely, but actually, they can be a great tool, especially if you start by reading along and then gradually remove them.
Yes, watching shows or listening to podcasts with subtitles first, then switching them off, can help your brain bridge the gap between listening and understanding. It's all about making that transition smoother.
Exactly.
It's all about training your brain step by step, so it gets more comfortable with English naturally.
And another fun way to do this is by listening to audiobooks while following along with the text. It helps you connect pronunciation with spelling, and over time, you'll start recognizing words by sound alone.
That's a great tip. And if you don't want to commit to a whole book, you can do the same thing with song lyrics.
Listen to a song, read the lyrics, and then try to sing along without looking.
Yes, music is a fantastic way to learn pronunciation, rhythm, and even informal expressions. Plus, it makes learning more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
And while we're talking about fun ways to learn, let's not forget about podcasts. They're one of the best tools because you can choose topics you love, and many language learning podcasts slow things down just a bit to help learners.
Right, and with podcasts, you also get exposure to natural conversations, different accents, and even slang. Plus, you can listen to them anytime while cooking, exercising, or even before bed.
And speaking of listening before bed,
some people actually try to learn English in their sleep. Have you heard about that?
Oh yeah, the idea that you can absorb a language just by playing it while you sleep. But does it really work? Let's break that down.
All right, so we've covered a lot today: passive learning, listening to English while sleeping, and the best ways to actually make progress.
The bottom line, while sleep learning might help a little with exposure, real progress happens when you actively engage with the language.
Exactly, so instead of relying on magic shortcuts, focus on making English a part of your daily life, whether it's listening to podcasts, watching movies, or practicing conversations. Small, consistent efforts make a huge difference.
Couldn't have said it better.
And on that note, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever tried learning English while sleeping?
Did it work for you?
Let us know.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you next time on British Accent Podcast.